Welcome to today's webinar, Revitalization and Redevelopment, Advancing Local Projects Through Tools and Programs, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning, the third in a series of 3 programs that are part of a series we are calling From Due Diligence to Redevelopment. My name is Sylvia Mosser, and I'm a Resource Conservation Planner with the Maryland Department of Planning. In this series, we will explore how Maryland's brownfields provide a unique opportunity for communities to meet economic development goals, environmental protection and sustainability goals, and help achieve local comprehensive plan visions and objectives. Maryland's brownfields can also be assets for revitalization, reinvestment, and redevelopment. This webinar series will provide opportunities to learn the essential environmental and statutory requirements for brownfield property transactions from regulatory, legal, and consultant experts, as well as assistance and know-how for redeveloping brownfields from federal, state, and real estate development specialists. This webinar is one of many webinars produced by the Maryland Department of Planning. The department also produces webinars on behalf of the Smart Growth Network on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. You can also find out about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. We are recording this webinar and will be posting it on our website. We encourage you to visit the website and to visit smartgrowth.org, where you can subscribe to our email list to learn about our upcoming webinars. The views expressed by speakers in this webinar are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the Maryland Department of Planning or the state of Maryland. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1 CM credit from the American Planning Association. To log your AICP credit, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is Revitalization and Redevelopment, Advancing Local Projects Through Tools and Programs. You can also search for event number 925-0378. Our speakers today are Robin Keegan, Seema Thomas, Erik Pechuekonis, Olivia Ceccarelli-McGonigal, Nicholas Mayer, and Scott Slauson. Robin Keegan is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Economic Development for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Robin is sought-after policy thought leader and practitioner committed to transforming communities through proven strategies in resilience and economic equity. Seema Thomas is the Deputy Director for the Financial Management Division of HUD, overseeing the Section 108 Loan Guarantee Program. Seema has been working on community development challenges for the past 2 decades, with a focus on developing and expanding innovative and inclusive initiatives to support communities from the neighborhood to the metropolitan scale, both domestically and internationally. Erik Pechuekonis is a community planning and development specialist for HUD, who works with the Section 108 Loan Guarantee Program. Prior to joining HUD, Erik served in Albania as a Peace Corps volunteer, where he worked with local municipalities on urban planning-related issues. Olivia Ceccarelli-McGonigal is an AICP certified planner and an assistant director for state revitalization programs within the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD. Olivia leads a small team that writes program policy, reviews projects for historic preservation compliance, and implements the Sustainable Community Program. Nicholas Mayer is the Maryland DHCD Program Officer for the statewide Demolition Fund, Project Core program, and the Baltimore Regional Neighborhoods Initiative program. Nick managed the Southwest Baltimore Regional Grant Portfolio prior to moving into his current role. Scott Slauson is Chief Operating Officer for 28 Walker Development, a Baltimore-based development company with a focus on smart urban infill development. As Chief Operating Officer, Scott oversees all aspects of acquisition, development, and asset management for the firm. Following the presentation, our panelists will answer as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question anytime by using the Questions tool located in the control panel on the right side of your screen. We will take a few quick polls to get started. If you are unable to respond to the polls by clicking, please leave full screen mode. Our first poll question is, where do you live/work? Please select one of the following answers: Maryland, Mid-Atlantic outside of Maryland, United States outside of Mid-Atlantic, or outside of the United States? We'll just take a few more seconds to respond to the first poll question. So our responses to this first question show that 43%, the majority, are from the United States outside of the Mid-Atlantic region. Second, we have 31% from Maryland, 22% from the Mid-Atlantic outside of Maryland, and 4% of people are from outside the United States. The second question we have is, which best describes the organization you are representing today? Please select one: a community organization, local or state government, a planning agency / organization, a nonprofit or philanthropic organization, or other. Please take a few more seconds to respond to this question. For the response to the second question, we have 45% are from a local or state government, 40% are from some other type of organization, 12% are from a planning agency / organization, 2% from a nonprofit or philanthropic organization, and 1% from community organizations. For our third question, we have, what is the top barrier to brownfields redevelopment in your experience? Please select one of the following answers: lack of financial resources, too many requirements / legal liability, lack of understanding or need more education, extended project timeline, or other. Please take a few seconds to respond to this poll question. The responses to this final question, we have a tie between lack of financial resources at 35% and lack of understanding or need more education, also at 35%. Too many requirements or legal liability at 14%. 9% of people responded that it's due to the extended project timeline, and 6% responded with other. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robin Keegan. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you. I'm going to get myself on screen in a second. Thanks. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. Hopefully somebody can give me a heads up if they can't.
Yep, we got you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, this is good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about revitalization of brownfields and highlight some of the opportunities to use HUD's resources to support communities that have faced disinvestment over the years as a result of contamination. I want to express my gratitude to the Maryland Department of Planning for using this platform to illustrate how communities can utilize HUD and other resources to bring these projects to life. As you know, brownfields are disproportionately located in low-income communities of color, and redeveloping them intersects with many of this administration's priorities for racial, economic, and environmental equity, economic recovery from the pandemic, and addressing the effects of climate change. In the first few weeks of this administration, President Biden launched the Justice 40 initiative, a whole-of-government approach to ensure federal agencies work with states and local communities to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate, clean energy, and other areas such as brownfields redevelopment to disadvantaged communities. Here at HUD, we have taken this Justice 40 approach as an opportunity to really think about forward-looking, how we do our work and the resources we provide in a proactive and forward-looking way of creating solutions to bring environmental justice and opportunity to communities. When thinking about brownfields, we know this means focusing on equitable community planning and engagement, avoiding displacement of residents and small businesses, thinking through how redevelopment can incorporate climate resiliency and attract investment to long neglected areas. We're thinking through Justice 40 and our climate goals at every point in time throughout all of our portfolio and programs. We're also working closely with other agencies like EPA and the Department of Energy on ways we can work together to deliver on these goals and better coordinate the federal response to environmental contamination. A main focus of the office I lead at HUD, the Office of Economic Development, is to employ innovative approaches that help communities align and target federal, state, and local funding, along with private market funding, to help communities make more effective and strategic investments that support stronger and more diverse economies, invest in small businesses, expand investment in high-performing buildings and infrastructure, invest in place-based strategies, promote improved access to housing, jobs, and educational opportunities, and respond and become more resilient in the face of crisis and risk. Today, I'm excited to share with you the Section 108 program. I'll shortly turn it over to staff from our sister office, the Office of Block Grant Assistance, to fill in additional details. The Section 108 program is the loan guarantee component of Community Development Block Grant Program, our CDBG program, acronyms that don't always easily roll off the tongue. It offers states and communities an accessible and flexible means for economic development. The CDBG program is focused on assisting low and moderate income populations. All of Maryland's 14 entitlement communities, which are communities that meet certain population requirements to receive CDBG entitlement funding from HUD, contain brownfields. The hallmark of our CDBG program is the role of local decision-making, enabling communities to design programs and projects that fit their local context, underscored by a long-standing practice of community feedback. Section 108 has multiple angles for doing this. It can be done through the development of a public space, of this public facility, as well as through economic anchors for creating jobs and more inclusive communities. HUD, through this program, guarantees these Section 108 loans, basically providing the full faith and credit of the United States government behind this financing. The funding can be used to close a deal, or sometimes the guarantee can send a signal for more investment to pour in during a very early stage of the project. Remediation and redevelopment of brownfields stimulates economic development and is in line with the CDBG national objectives and eligible activities. Section 108 is a useful program to help communities leverage CDBG funds. As you consider the most effective deployment and revitalization methods, I urge you all to center and involve communities surrounding brownfields. When community insights and perspectives are considered early and often, even before planning and implementation of brownfield redevelopment efforts, the risk of gentrification and displacement of communities of members can be prevented and minimized at worst. Local residents should be able to play and enjoy the benefits of economic revitalization while continuing to live, work, and play in the neighborhood they call home. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to see the transformation of the communities you all work in, and I'll turn it back over to my colleagues. Thank you again.
Hello, I'm Seema Thomas, Deputy Director for the Financial Management Division, which oversees the Section 108 Loan Guarantee Program, and I'm joined by my colleague, Erik Pechuekonis, as well. I'm going to turn off my camera, get the full screen. So we're very excited to be here and excited that Robin was able to set the stage of the work of HUD as well as our program, HUD Section 108. So the Section 108 program. It knows the redevelopment space of brownfields. It's been working in this space for decades, and in particular, how it can intersect with many other community goals and challenges. So this can range from supporting low to economic development, to low and moderate income communities, to economic development, to placemaking, even to improving the resilience of people, places, and even infrastructure. So over the course of many decades, we've seen Section 108 projects in our portfolio use the financing to meet multiple goals and redevelop brownfields at the same time. And we also wanted to flag for our program specifically, there's almost $250 million in untapped resources for the state of Maryland and counties and cities in the state of Maryland. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to flip around our presentation a little bit. We're going to talk briefly about a few project examples that we have in our portfolio, hopefully to pique your interest, give you a brief overview of CDBG and how our program fits in there, and then just go through some of the mechanics of our program, and then finally explain a little more about how it can be combined with other sources of financing, as well as some resources that we have available. Let's dive in. So these are examples from our portfolio. Again, these are not exhaustive. We have many more, but we can go into greater detail to explain. So broadly, Section 108 can be used for 4 categories: economic development, housing, public facilities, and infrastructure. But then within those categories, there's a lot more that a community can do. And we mentioned this here today because oftentimes with the redevelopment of brownfields, it intersects with many other types of community goals and needs. So sometimes it might be combined with economic development, it might be combined with the construction or upgrade of a park. So there's just a lot of different permutations, and we wanted to leave you to dwell in possibility of what a community could envision. And also with that, it can range in scale and scope. So sometimes communities seek to take a more incremental approach in using Section 108 financing, and then other times they go to the other end on the continuum, seeking to do something more transformational, something that could redevelop an entire neighborhood, and then of course everything between. And what's important here also to bear in mind is that communities can take out as little as they need or as much as they need. So we've had Section 108 projects as small as 30,000, but also as large as hundreds of millions. So it really depends on the needs of the community, what type of risk they're willing to take, and the type of project that they're hoping to do. So this is a project in Meriden, Connecticut, and we wanted to highlight it because this community had this site where it had a silver factory. There was quite a bit of contamination. It was a brownfield. And they also had other problems. So they had flooding that was not, in terms of frequency, 1 in 100 years. It was far more frequent than that. And it was also nearby a low and moderate income community that did not have adequate park and open space. So the community used Section 108. They combined it actually with EPA funds, and they used it for the demolition of the site, but then also for remediation, which later turned into putting in some flood control infrastructure and creating a park that is heavily used by its nearby community residents. And another example, and this is an exciting example in Waltham, Massachusetts, here the community had a municipal landfill. It had been open since the early 1900s, and it had closed in the 1970s, but not much had been done with it. And it was nearby a low and moderate income community that did not have adequate park space. So they used the Section 108 to be able to work on multiple phases of redeveloping this site, and rather than doing it in sequence. So they were able to work on these phases in parallel. And so they used the 108 to test and identify a good landfill cap that could be for the site, as well as look into remediation. And then the long-term goal is to turn it into a beautiful park space that can be used by nearby residents. And then this is another example. This comes out of Cleveland, Ohio. And here there was a brownfield site, and the community had a couple of other goals that they wanted to combine with this. They remediated the site, this brownfield site that was post-industrial, and to an employee-owned cooperative that grows greens, as you can see here. But it was also an economic development project as well, in that it created a lot of jobs. So these were just, again, some examples that we have from our portfolio that we wanted to highlight, especially because they combined multiple community goals with this overarching goal of redeveloping brownfields. So now let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of Section 108, the inner workings and how it works. So as Robin mentioned, it is part of the bigger program at HUD of the Community Development Block Grant Program. And the Community Development Block Grant Program, CDBG, provides annual grants on a formula basis to states and cities and counties throughout the United States and territories. And the goal of this is to help support viability of communities, and in particular, improve opportunities in the community for low and moderate income persons. So about $3.5 billion were appropriated last year. About 70% goes to cities and counties, and 30% goes to states. Now, our program is the loan component of the CDBG program. So it is not a grant, but it is a very low cost, flexible loan that is non-competitive. Anyone can apply for it any time of the year. And it does use the programmatic framework of the CDBG program. And what we mean by that is that all the requirements that one might be aware of for the CDBG program, those are applicable to our program as well. Because it is a non-competitive program, we can provide considerable one-on-one technical assistance at all stages of the project. So when your community has the idea, but you're not sure if they're really going to use a Section 108, we can have those conversations, even if you decide not to use a Section 108. And then even if you do have a 108, we can work with communities on restructuring it if circumstances or market conditions change. Now, because we are part of the CDBG program, at least one national objective must be met. And these are the three options that communities have. We primarily see benefit to low and moderate income persons, but we also do see the elimination of blight. And then we do have a third national objective, though not used often, and that is urgent need. Again, communities must meet at least one of these, what we call national objectives, for the project to be eligible. In terms of thinking about who has access to CDBG, these are typically the CDBG administrators in your communities, and the funds can go to the city, local government there, and urban counties as well, and then states. But there are mechanisms for the funds to go through. So it can go to subrecipients, it can go to CDCs, it can be relent to third-party borrowers. So there's a lot of different ways these partnership arrangements can be made. We encourage communities that are exploring a slightly more complex partnership arrangement, and it may even a simpler one, to feel free to contact us and we can help walk through some of the pros and cons of 108, of using it with that, or how to configure it optimally. Now, in terms of borrowing capacity, each community, as we mentioned before, receives a CDBG annual allocation of X amount, and we have the actual current availability, which we'll put into the chat, so you can look up your community's exact borrowing capacity. For Section 108, a community can take up to 5 times their CDBG allocation of that fiscal year. And then we would subtract out any existing Section 108 commitments, any loan balances, and then you have your resulting borrowing capacity. And again, we have all that information in that specific borrowing capacity listed at this link on HUD Exchange. Here, just to make it a little bit easier, since we know, although we learned that we have a good number of communities joining from outside the state of Maryland. Here we listed the entitlement communities in the state of Maryland as well as the state of Maryland, just to give you a quick snapshot of what those borrowing capacities, those thresholds look like. Now, we wanted to mention that there are 2 approaches to using Section 108. So perhaps the most common one is what we call a project-specific approach. And this is, as you might imagine, as the name would suggest, when you have a lot of detail, a lot of information about a specific project. You know where it is, all the different stakeholders that are involved, et cetera. And that underwriting would happen in headquarters, and we work very closely with the field office on looking at the programmatic side. Then the second approach that we're seeing used more often is what we call the loan pool or a loan fund approach. And this has far less specificity. This is where communities seek to bundle projects together. So as an example, they might have a loan fund or loan pool dedicated to brownfields in a particular county, as an example. So different communities or different stakeholders, subrecipients, would then seek that funding, and it could be underwritten at a local level, and then the funds could be then distributed out. One of the advantages of this is that you don't have to come back to HUD to constantly get each one of these loans underwritten and move forward. It gives a lot more flexibility. It encourages communities that already have a pipeline of projects to pursue this. So again, there's multiple approaches for doing this. We're seeing an increased use of loan pools, and we wanted to share that today because it does provide more flexibility for communities that are seeking to do or to scale their work. And then again, just to bear in mind, in terms of eligible activities, our funds can be used for the preparation pre-development site. This is everything from acquisition to relocation costs. And then again, on the implementation side, again, quite a bit of range for what it can be used for. And with that, I will now pass to Erik to share more about the requirements, both on the programmatic and financial side.
Thank you, Seema. One sec. So, Seema discussed, the Section 108 program falls under this CDBG framework. So with that, we have some standard requirements for that, including eligible activity, national objective, public benefit standard, which is only applicable for economic development projects, and standard federal cross-cutting requirements. But on top of that, we also have, financial requirements. So we need to, identify a source of repayment, a source of collateral. So like for collateral, the primary source for a Section 108 loan is going to be the borrower's present and future CDBG funds. But in the event that CDBG funds are not sufficient or no longer around, the borrower needs to identify another source of collateral. Often we see a property lien or a full faith and credit pledge or a debt service reserve. We are very flexible. So if there's an idea, just let us know. Similarly for repayment. So the Section 108 process starts with the public comment period, and selecting the project. So the public needs to be involved very, early on in the process. And then, this borrower will submit the application to HUD, where we then offer approval for a commitment. So that just means that, we're not giving you funds yet. It's just the commitment for the potential of funds once, the loan documents are signed and executed. And that is in the financing stage. And then after the financing stage, we have the administration. So our loan terms, go up to 20 years. So, our office will be working with you for that entire 20 years. Oops, sorry. So just to give you an idea of like a typical flow of funds. So the funds for the Section 108 program actually do not come from HUD itself. HUD guarantees the funds. The funds come from our lender, who is the Bank of New York Mellon in this case. So all the advances will go to the borrower from them, and then the repayments will go to the Bank of New York Mellon. When HUD will step in is if, say, a payment is missed, then we will pull from a borrower's CDBG line of credit and make that payment with those funds. And just another example, if you throw in a third-party developer, it's a similar setup, but then you have a subrecipient or a borrower there. So the borrower is collecting funds from that third-party entity and also disperses funds to that third-party entity. So why is Section 108 an attractive financing tool? As Seema discussed, there's a wide range of uses, going from, remediation to economic development to, constructing community facilities. There's low cost financing with, variable terms. So interest rate right now is, currently about 2%, and, we can do terms up to 20 years. We can also, if there's need be, we can defer principal payments for a few years if there's a justification for that. And we accept various sources of repayment and collateral. So if you have some creative idea you want to run by us, just let us know. And then there's an immediate availability of funds. There's no rolling deadlines or anything like that with our program. So Section 108 can also be combined with other sources of financing, and other federal sources. So, Seema mentioned on some of the examples like EPA funds. But typically how Section 108 is used for a project, it can be either used standalone layered as part of general financing for the project, or it can be serve as gap financing. So say that they just need a little bit more money to complete a project and you don't know where to get it. Yes, Section 108 can be used for that. And we work with other federal agencies such as Treasury Department with new market tax credits, historic tax credits, various EPA loan programs, and just some general resources that we have available, on our website. And I think some of the links have been dropped in the chat, but we have application checklist, just basically anything you need to know about the process, should be on our website. And if you have any more specific questions, we're happy to answer it one-on-one at any stage in the application process. And also we do have a mailing list if anybody would be interested in that. So just said about the technical assistance, we basically any step, or if you have an idea, or if you're trying to figure out how to from that or how to implement it, or where we can help out with that. And then just as our contact information. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick and Olivia with the Maryland Department of Housing.
Great, thank you. As Nick pulls up the slides, I'll just begin by saying, good afternoon. My name is Olivia Checarelli-McGonigal. I'm here with my colleague, Nick Mayer from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, and we will be talking about one of our funding programs.
Excuse me, Olivia.
Yes.
Nicholas, could you please swap using the display settings? Go ahead and put it into, go ahead and show it. You could.
Great. So we will be talking about the Strategic Demolition Fund program. So really quickly, who are we and what do we do? We are from the Division of Neighborhood Revitalization, which is part of the community development side of the department, and we provide technical and financial assistance to our local partners who in turn help to revitalize Maryland's core communities. The Strategic Demolition Fund is one of the 6 financing programs we have in our suite of state revitalization programs. It provides grants and loans to our eligible applicants, who are local governments and nonprofit community development organizations, to help subsidize pre-development uses, usually for a larger development project. The premise is that such activities are sometimes more difficult to finance, and the infusion of funds will thus make gray and brownfield redevelopment more competitive with greenfield development. There are 2 parallel Strategic Demolition Fund programs, one available to eligible projects statewide, and Project Core available to Baltimore City eligible projects. So what are those eligible uses? As you can see here, we can use the funds for pre-development activities, including demolition of derelict non-contributing structures, site acquisition and assembly, site development, including infrastructure and environmental remediation, construction level architectural and engineering designs, and stabilization of buildings. On average, our awards are between $350,000 and $500,000, and this is more or less depending on the development gap and how competitive our round is. So for fiscal year 2023, we have $9 million available in capital funds for the statewide program, and we have $21 million available to the Project Core program. In fact, our fiscal year 2023 application round is currently open, so feel free to go to the chat. We should have a link to our website there. The last thing I wanted to mention is that our projects do need to be within a sustainable community for the most part. There are a couple exceptions that we can provide you with later on, but sustainable communities is our geographic target area, and that's targeted for investment. Please go to our website, this link here, in order to access that application to determine whether or not that project is within a sustainable community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Mayer. I'm going to take us through a couple of examples of how the Strategic Demolition Fund has been used here in Maryland. Our first example is with the City of Aberdeen. As Olivia mentioned, the SDF program can support pre-development, including remediation for awarded projects. And in FY17, the department made an award of $100,000 to support the redevelopment of the old Aberdeen High School, which you can see here. The property was sold to a private developer to redevelop it as office space for medical uses, with construction anticipated over a number of phases and leveraging about $5 million in additional work. And this award supported that environmental remediation necessary to address things like lead and asbestos and to bring the building up to modern standards. In Baltimore City, the project core kind of flavor of SDF since FY16 has supported a number of projects reusing large vacant industrial properties. Our first example here is from the Mary Harvin Transformation Center, CDC, which received a Project Core award of $600,000 in FY 2018 to acquire, demolish, and remediate the former Buccal Laundry Factory building on Baltimore's east side. The abandoned building needed substantial remediation work through the voluntary cleanup program with MDE, and the intention is to reuse the cleared site as a neighborhood health and wellness center. Just to the south in the East Baltimore Acre Street area, EBDI, East Baltimore Development, Inc. used an FY17 Project Core award in the amount of $500,000 to do site preparation and infrastructure work to prepare for 45 new for-sale townhomes. And you can see the completed homes on the right in the Google Street View image. The grant funds supported the cost of voluntary cleanup work on the site, including site testing, the removal of contaminated soil, the introduction of clean fill for certain areas, and other associated costs. For our last example, the Park Heights Renaissance Community Development Corporation is currently working on a multifamily building on Cold Spring Lane in Baltimore's northwest. This project received an FY21 Project Core award of $250,000 to acquire and demolish a former vacant industrial property that created industrial vaults. The redevelopment of this property, which is adjacent to a metro station, will result in the creation of 163 affordable multifamily apartment units adjacent to transit. In this case, the Project Core funding is focused on uses that free up some room for managing remediation, but the core funds are being spent on a different portion of the budget. In total, through the Project Core track, more than $59 million in state funds have supported competitive projects like this one since FY16. The end result will be more than 1,100 new housing units, 460,000 square feet of retail and commercial space, and more than 14 3/4 acres of parks and green space. So before we pass things back and open the floor for questions, just as a refresher, when you're thinking about how to access state resources here in Maryland to address gaps and additional costs, especially for brownfield sites, you want to think about 4 things. Do you have an eligible applicant? Are you an eligible applicant, or can you partner with someone who is? Is your project shovel ready and ready to go? Will it make a revitalization impact? And will it leverage other resources? These are the 4 areas that create a really competitive application for our funding. As a reiteration here, eligible applicants must be local governments or community development corporations. So if you are a private developer or another part of the development ecosystem, really, as was mentioned earlier, make those connections with your community early and think broadly about who can be your partner and how they can help you access the resources you need to reuse these vacant sites. And that's that.
John, can you see my screen okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. I'm Scott Slauson. I'm Chief Operating Officer for a company called 28 Walker Development. We are a local Baltimore development company, and we focus on smart urban infill development in the city of Baltimore. We've primarily worked in and around the city's waterfront, transforming former industrial sites that are directly adjacent to residential neighborhoods into thriving, neighborhood destinations. And so our three kind of hallmark projects that we've worked on over the years are McHenry Row, which was the former Chesapeake Paperboard Center. It's located in Locust Point in Baltimore. It's about 19 acres in total. It was comprised of the Chesapeake Paperboard Center and the former Phillips Seafood and Coca-Cola manufacturing facility. Canton Crossing, which is about 30 acres. In Canton, which was a former Exxon refinery terminal, and then the collective at Canton, which is our most recent phase, is about 21 acres, in which Exxon had used previously as a storage yard for petroleum products. Just to give you a little bit of a development perspective on our end, why we develop brownfield properties. For us, I think in Baltimore specifically, being local, there's a lot of opportunity in a post-industrial world. Baltimore has a rich manufacturing history, and a lot of the manufacturing and industrial locations were located directly adjacent to residential neighborhoods, which served as the workforce for the industrial manufacturing facilities. As some of those facilities pulled out of Baltimore or found other more efficient sites, or the real estate became more valuable, that left holes in and around neighborhoods that really became blighted and underutilized and an eyesore, and generally a source of contamination associated with their past historic use. Obviously, a lot of these sites have represented a good opportunity for infill for us. I think from an impact perspective, we look at these sites as being able to have a large impact on economic growth in and around the community itself, not just directly within our site, but we generally see that the development activity that we create and establish leads to a outward effect of growth and additional economic investment in and around the areas that we take the initiative to develop. And also importantly for us, it's rewarding. It's both profitable for us, but I think it's equally profitable or not profitable, but beneficial for the surrounding communities. A lot of times these sites have sat dormant for a long period of time. They're an eyesore, and they are not contributing anything. And generally there's some lingering contamination that remains to be cleaned up. And we're happy to take that activity on as part of our overall development plan. So for us, I think, talking about tools and programs for us, I think from a development perspective, and when we do brownfield redevelopment work, we're always looking at quantifying and mitigating risk. And for us, I think we look at risk in the form of contamination liability. We want to have an understanding of what the previous use was, what they may have been doing to contribute towards potential contamination, and what that contamination means both locally at the site and where it may be or has previously migrated from the site. So I think on our end, we're always trying to get a handle early on as it relates to the liability associated with redeveloping the property, whether that's associated with the cleanup risk or things that may have happened related to the operation that may have migrated off-site. I think from us, I think we're also looking at the remediation cost risk and the performance risk associated with redeveloping the property and bringing it into compliance with current regulatory requirements. And so on our end, I think we focus heavily on the site environmental assessments. So we look at the cost associated with, site environmental assessments. And I think on our end, we generally try to be heavier up front with brownfield properties on the phase 1s and phase 2s to make sure that we have a full and complete understanding of what we may be dealing with and try to minimize the potential of surprises on the back end. And then I think we're also looking to, try to quantify the remedial action costs associated with cleaning up the property. On our end, those are the key variables in brownfield redevelopment, and we're always trying to make sure that we have a good handle on that so that once we go ahead and acquire the property, we can move through the process that's been established to bring the property into good standing and to remediate it in accordance with state regulations. On our end, there's been talk today about a bunch of different programs and tools that can be helpful in redeveloping brownfield property. I think today I'll talk about 3 things that we've used on a pretty consistent basis and give you a real life example of how we used it at our Canton Crossing project. But from our end, the voluntary cleanup program is something that's extremely important to us. It was created in 1997, and it provides state oversight for the voluntary cleanup of properties to ensure compliance with existing environmental regulations. It's an established program with a clearly defined pathway for remediation completion, and for us, that's extremely important. I think we're extremely pleased working with the department. They've always been a good sounding board. They've been able to help guide us as we look at our pathway to make sure that we're developing and redeveloping the property in a way that protects health and human safety. I think another important aspect of the program is that it provides inculpable person status, provided you comply with the terms of the program. And that's important because it gives us liability protection from any liability existing prior to the purchase of the property. And so when we look at the redevelopment of the property, we're happy to take on and tackle the activity of redeveloping the property, but being granted inculpable person status is important from a risk mitigation perspective. And extremely helpful as we go through this process to redevelop the property. And secondly, I think the lender liability protection, the lender is not considered a responsible party or a culpable party in any way, shape, or form while lending on properties that are within the voluntary cleanup program. So that helps lenders get more comfortable as they go through the process on lending on properties that have a remediation requirement associated with them. The other program that we've used is Advantage Maryland, or also called MEDAAF. That's a state-run program through the Department of Commerce, and that program provides funding in the form of grants, loans, and investments to support economic development initiatives. It covers a wide range of activities, but brownfield happens to be one of them. It provides economic incentives in the form of funding for environmental site assessments and sometimes remediation. That process is a competitive process, and the projects must be located within a priority funding area. We've used those in the past for both environmental site assessments as well as remediation work. And lastly, but equally importantly, is the Brownfield Revitalization Incentive Program, also known as BRIP. That's a real property tax credit, and that credit varies in both term and the percentage of credit based upon the location and the cost incurred to remediate the property. I'm going to talk a little bit just about how we used all three of those tools now for redevelopment of the Canton Crossing project. It's about 30 acres in total in Canton. As I mentioned previously, the site was previously owned by Exxon. It was owned and operated by Exxon, and from 1865, they began operations as one of the nation's first refineries at the site, producing petroleum products. In 1965, they converted to a terminal for storing and distributing bulk petroleum products. In 84, they ceased the terminal storage operations, and in 1985, Exxon began dismantling the operations at the property. In 1997, MDE and Exxon entered into a consent decree to provide a roadmap for the remediation associated with the contamination from their previous operations. And in 2007, MDE and Exxon entered into an updated agreement and continued to address petroleum contamination at the site. As Exxon fulfilled their obligations under the consent decree, they received no further actions specific to their petroleum activity. However, in order to bring it beyond that standard of the consent decree and to put it into a new and different use, especially something commercial, we elected to bring the property into the voluntary cleanup program to provide guidance and oversight as we prepared the site for a different use from its previous industrial use into one as a commercial shopping center. So for us, for Canton Crossing, and really all of our sites, these comments apply. But for us, I think the process is important as it relates to the voluntary cleanup program. It provides state oversight to ensure remediation regulatory compliance, which is great to know. As you go through the process of identifying and preparing a cleanup plan, it's always helpful to have the oversight in addition to what you're receiving from your environmental consultant to ensure that you're going things in a way that will protect health and human safety. I think equally important is that you're getting clear and concise regulatory pathway for remediation. I think, as I stated earlier, Maryland is lucky to have such an established program with great people that work there. with the goal of protecting health and human safety. And having a program that's established and has a clearly defined process gives us a lot more comfort as it relates to certainty with moving from site assessment all the way through the remediation process to completion. It also gives a lot of comfort to those that the oversight provides a lot of comfort to those in the form of the community. I think a lot of times you find that communities find these sites that are in and around their community that have been a source of it or an industrial past use. There's speculation about what contamination may or may not occur at the site. I think having that oversight component makes the process with the community a little bit more comfortable because they understand you're going through a prescribed process and that the state is heavily involved in ensuring that, you know, all are made safe, both those at the property and those around the property. I think it's helpful for prospective tenants of the property because it gives them an understanding that we've put the property back into regulatory compliance from a state perspective. And from a lender perspective, it's helpful for them to know that we're going through a prescribed process and they understand that their liability is protected. Oh, did I lose you there? John, did I lose you?
Put it back up.
Okay, sorry. Hang on one sec. Oh, there we go. Okay, can you see it okay? Can you see it now, John?
It looks good.
Okay, thanks. Again, as I mentioned earlier, from a protections perspective, the voluntary cleanup program provides IP status or inculpable person status and lender liability protection, which is important. And again, and then lastly is the financial incentives associated with it. By participating into the voluntary cleanup program, it unlocks the potential to receive additional economic incentive for participating in the program in the forms of grants, loans, and or tax credits that are available. So at Canton specifically, we went through the program and it worked very well for us. At Canton specifically, one of the things that we did was we entered into an agreement with Advantage Maryland. We received 2 grants at Canton Crossing. One was an assessment-oriented grant for phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments. That allowed us to perform a more robust environmental site assessment, which was important to us. We could spend more money with the assistance from the program. It allowed us to have a better overall understanding of the property, which in turn led to a smoother overall process in both entering into the program and establishing a remedial action plan that fully covered the contamination at the property for its intended use. One of the requirements, obviously, with that program is that after completing the assessments that you do enter into the VCP program. And that grant was a $50,000 grant. It was the lesser of $50,000 or 50% of eligible costs associated with performing phase 1 and phase 2 site assessments. We also received the remediation grant at the property under MEDAAF, and that was for $800,000, and that was for eligible remediation activities. That was for the lesser of $800,000 or 25% of the eligible remediation costs. There were requirements. The requirements were to have been previously accepted into the VCP and to complete remediation as identified in the response action plan. And for us, that meant using the funds for removal of contaminated soil, the installation of subslab vapor mitigation systems in each of the buildings at the property, and the completion of environmental caps in the form of hardscape and softscape caps, and obviously to obtain a COC or a certificate of completion, which is the completion of the program. And so on our end, we were able to hit the 800,000 mark by spending more than $3.2 million on the remediation. So for us, it was extremely helpful to have that tool available as we went through the process and to look at that as part of the capital stack of remediating the property and certainly helped contribute towards the success of the project there. The next item that we used at Canton was the Brownfield Revitalization Incentive Program, or also known as BRIP. BRIP comes in the form of a tax credit. Specifically, BRIP comes in 2 different terms. It comes in either 5-year terms for a tax credit of 5 years or 10 years, depending on your location. We happen to be located within an enterprise zone. So in an enterprise zone, you're eligible for a 10-year credit. The credit amount, if you're spending below $250,000 in remediation, is 50%, or 70% if you've gone beyond the remediation costs exceeding $250,000. The credit how the credit works from a mechanical perspective, it is applied against the increase in the assessed value. So from a credit requirement perspective, you've got to complete the VCP program. You have to get your COC issued. And the CANTON project, it was located in an enterprise zone, so we were eligible for 10 years of term, and the remediation cost exceeded $250,000, so we were eligible for a 70% credit. And because we were in an enterprise zone and because of its use, there was also an additional enterprise zone tax credit associated with the project. So to give you, I'll try to be quick because I know we're coming up short on time here, but the credit, more specifically here, I've highlighted an example on the in the credit application, and we received the 70% credit, and so it's applied against the increase in assessed value. So for argument's sake, or just the purposes of a demonstration, if the completed assessed value of the project was 10 million upon completion, and the original base value was 1 million prior to that, then the amount eligible for the credit would be $9 million. $9 million would be eligible for a 70% credit, which means of assessed value, $6.3 million would be available for credit. So the way that that calculation works and translates to real dollars would be that you take the assessed value that's eligible, so $6.3 million divided by every $100, every increment of $100, and you multiply it by the tax rate of 2.28 for the city tax rate, and that would equate to a $144,000 credit for 10 straight years if the taxes remain fixed at that assessed value. So it's powerful stuff, and it's extremely important, and it's necessary at the same time, because if you look at what I made mention of earlier, we had $3.2 million in cost associated with the remediation. So these are just tools that help offset those, but certainly make it more viable. On our end, what we do with the tax credit, depending on the use, if you have a triple net retail oriented scenario, we may elect to keep the retention of the credit benefit for ourselves and not pass that on through the tenant, because it's really helping us to offset the true remediation cost associated with the property. So there's a million different ways that you can work with the credit, but on our end, these are the three things that have been really helpful for us in and out. There's a host of other programs, but I thought I would just try to share some perspective on how we've used programs to make brownfield redevelopment work. And John, that's it on my end.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to all of our presenters today. These are really excellent, and we do have a few questions that we've been assembling from our audience. And so if folks want to put their webcams on, these are all of our great presenters today. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then Sylvia will take over for me. And if our presenters have and our audience has a few minutes extra, we may be able to run past 2 o'clock, to as much time as folks have, 2:15 at the latest, to ask the questions. And I thought maybe I can start actually with a question to you, Scott, just to follow up. We have one question from Heather Saylor. She asked, at what point in the process do you recruit businesses? And also, how do you make sure the project is sustainable?
Yeah, so on our end, the recruitment of businesses as it relates to prospective tenants or things of that nature, we generally start that with a thought in mind as it relates to a use as we're going through this. And to the extent that we have a development plan that is ironed out enough that we feel comfortable with sharing, we always try to bring people in as early as possible, whether that, and that's for a host of different reasons. One, it allows them to be able to understand how we move through the process, but it also allows us to be able to respond to specific space concerns or needs that we can help identify and try to address. And from a sustainability perspective, each project is different on our end. So at a very baseline level, we always comply with the IGBC, I'm going to get that wrong, from a sustainability perspective, but that landscape has changed a lot. So we've gone anywhere from LEED Gold all the way, just from a baseline of IGBC all the way to LEED Gold. And on that end, we look at that and generally see that the remediation or the sustainability perspective, we're generally always well above and beyond minimum requirements. I think the only thing that we sometimes are doing is looking at the timing and the process oriented of the certification of certain sustainable things, whether it be LEED or otherwise. We sometimes, if we're on a tight time frame, we'll look at those and manage them differently, but it doesn't necessarily change what we're doing from a sustainability perspective, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Scott. This is Sylvia again, guys. So yeah, for our second question, we have from Sophie Boresh. I think this is a question for our HUD presenters. Where are the 14 areas in Maryland that Ms. Robin Keegan had mentioned during her presentation?
Oh, one sec. Yeah, the 14 entitlement communities that we call, Maryland are Annapolis, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore, Baltimore County, City of Bowie, Cumberland, Frederick, Gaithersburg, Hagerstown, Hartford County, Howard County, Montgomery County, PG County, and Salisbury.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Eric.
No problem.
Another question that we had is asking if you guys could go into a little more detail on leveraging loan pools as a piece of the financing puzzle and discuss possible sources. And that question comes from Michael Baril.
So often when it comes to loan funds, there's going to need to be some other financing put in. So often, it could be paired with EPA funding or local funding. It could be paired with some sort of, business loan, where, the city would be doing remediation, then a developer would develop the parcel afterwards for business purposes. Seema, do you have anything else to add real quick?
Yeah, and to add to that, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be one type of project. So it could be a range of eligible activities. So it could include acquisition, it could include demolition, or it could be for the built environment type of situation. So that's just to bear in mind that it doesn't necessarily have to have a specific focus. It can be broader than that as well to give a lot of flexibility.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. We have a question for Olivia and Nick. And I also have a link that we can share about this, but how does Maryland choose the areas that it calls sustainable communities? And which counties besides Baltimore, I think besides Baltimore City, are these located in?
Nick, I can take this one. We have quite a few sustainable communities. We have 123 sustainable communities currently. There's at least one in each county across the state and many times more. It is a local government designation program. And so, Baltimore City is one of those sustainable communities. Many other municipalities also participate, and it runs kind of a different program, different cycle than our grant rounds. It's more focused on, what local governments and within their municipalities, these smaller target areas that are specifically, targeted for community development and revitalization. And it's a 5-year action plan that they're asked to put together, and then it's approved on the state's end. All of those plans and geographic areas are on our website. And, if you have any additional questions on that, feel free to follow up. I will say too that one of the slides I had shown also includes the link to our mapper application. And so again, that gives you the ability to take a look at those sustainable communities where your project could be located. Nick, did you have anything else to add?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. And then I think the last question we have in here is asking for whether there's a database that lists or maps where brownfields are. And I know I can answer this, that there is one that Maryland maintains. It's the Maryland Department of the Environment Land Restoration Program, has a mapping tool that lists some, but not all brownfields in Maryland. So I don't know if anybody has anything to add about that as far as maybe a national database or some other tools that you guys use to identify brownfields.
think the EPA has something on their website, like a geodatabase of them. I don't know, don't have a link offhand.
Thanks, Erik. Yeah, and we can try to find that link too and share it. So I think that's it for our questions. We just wanted to give you all an opportunity to end on a final thought, and we would probably work our way in the opposite order that we went through before. So we would start with Scott, and then go to Olivia and Nick, and then end with Seema and Erik. Scott, you want to get us started with a final thought?
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I mean, I think it's great that, there are a lot of different tools out there, and I think depending on your project and if you can reach out to the appropriate parties, there are a lot of opportunities. You just have to be able to, search them out and be well prepared for what you're trying to accomplish. But there's a lot of resources, and they certainly help and make a big difference in the viability of a project. So I encourage everyone to try and sort through what may be available and use them to their advantage.
Thanks, Scott. So, Olivia and Nick, did you guys want to end on a final thought, either one or both of you?
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I do want to just encourage everyone listening, definitely think broadly and early about your community and your partnerships around your project. Many of the resources we talked about, you really do need to have those connections with your local government, with a community development corporation or other community group in your area in order to access these grant tools. And they can make a big difference on a project. But you don't want to be, 10 days before the application deadline, trying to find a community group that likes your idea and wants to do the work of submitting an application. So start early.
Thanks, Nick. Olivia, did you want to add anything, or we could just, okay, so yeah, we'll move on to Seema and Erik. You guys have a final thought for us?
Sure. I guess from HUD's perspective and specific to our program, it's a really exciting time for communities. There's lots of funding that's come in a variety of formats and sizes as well. And so I really hope and encourage communities to really seek transformative solutions, and we're happy to be part of that brainstorming process because it's really an exciting time. I don't know how many opportunities there'll be like this. And again, we're always willing to help sort through ideas, even if it's our resources and our programs are not used, but we can always try to point you in the direction of other resources that are available.
Thank you, Seema. Erik, did you want to add anything?
Nope, I think she covered it.
Okay, great. So we'll conclude the webinar, Revitalization and Redevelopment, Advancing Local Projects Through Tools and Programs. I would like to offer a very large thank you to Robin, Seema, Erik, Olivia, Nick, and Scott for great presentations, to everyone who attended today, and to John Coleman, our communications and technology expert who helps to make this all happen. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on the Maryland Department of Planning's website. Also, for those who have requested one, all attendees will receive an email that will contain a link to a personalized certificate of participation. Please look for this follow-up email if you need the certificate to claim other continuing education credits. When you exit from today's webinar, you will be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. Have a great day.